Hey everybody, I have Carolyn Curry with me today. We decided through phone conversations to share stories about my father's experience during Pearl Harbor. She has information that she was told from her husband, John Francis Curry, right? It was John Francis, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Who, of course, was my father, Albert Curry's first cousin. And I met John and Caroline a few times at different Curry reunions in the past. And because they just celebrated the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, I posted some things. And she contacted me, like wanted to know, like, because she had a vague memory of what she was told of what happened. And I have a vague memory of what I grew up knowing. So I think the way we talked about before we started the record here was, Karen, I'm going to go ahead and let you say what your version was, which you heard from your husband, who you married. You both were in the Air Force. You met in the Air Force, and you guys were married in November 1st of 1969, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Boy, that 69 was a big year. A lot of things happened in 1969.
We met and married that year.
You guys got married, and the Beatles broke up. Well, listen, Karen. So why don't you go ahead and I mean, it's been a long, long time since you've heard all these stories, but kind of give me a vague, what you kind of remember of what you were told about my father's experience in Pearl Harbor.
Well, the story that I've been relating to my grandchildren about one of their relatives was that he was on a ship, whose name I don't know, when the Japanese attacked on December 7th, 1941, and was one of the injured, and that they had gone through the ships and removed all the injured from the ship, but he was unconscious, so they thought he was dead, and they left him there. And didn't find him again for 4 days, according to John's story. And then he later recovered, and John didn't really know any other details besides that.
Yeah, that is actually pretty close. But there are some details that I know and I have proof of knowledge. But basically, the theme of what you just said is correct. He was on a ship and he was injured, but he was not on the ship for 4 days. So why don't I have some pictures I'll share. So for those that don't know who my father was, he was born in Rockford, Illinois. His father was your husband's uncle. And so what was John's father's name? Was it Leo?
Leo, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thomas, was it Thomas Leo? They just called him Leo, or was it Leo?
Yeah, it was Thomas Leo.
Right, okay. So and I remember the first time I met your husband, John, at a reunion, I could not get over how much his mannerisms and my dad mannerisms were identical. And both John and my dad were tall men. Were tall Currys. A lot of the Currys were tall. But I just remember telling my
facial features are very much similar.
Yeah, yeah. And I just remember how, like, I told my sister afterwards, I said, this John, he's reminded me so much of Dad. But anyways, here's a picture of my father. He joined boot camp right after his own father passed away. He joined the Navy and he got assigned to the USS Pennsylvania. And the USS Pennsylvania was in dry dock number 1 when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And so because of that, it was not sunk. However, it was bombed. So obviously the torpedoes couldn't get it, but bombs did get it. And they dropped a lot of bombs on this dry dock 1. And you can see the 2 destroyers up front. That's the Caspian and the Downs. And the one that you can see that's really badly damaged, that was a huge, huge explosion. And you can actually see the smoke there. That's coming from the Arizona. And off to the left here, I don't know if you can see my mouse here. These are some of the other battles. Here's Battleship Row here. And then there's another battleship here. And then way back there is the Arizona on smoke. And then here's the Pennsylvania, which of course was bombed. But by this time, I think that they had put out most of the fires and stuff. So that was the ship that my dad was on. Let me see what's the next picture I want to show. Okay. Now, so what happened was, and I'll show this to you later. My father had duty that day, and as a boatswain mate, his job that day was to take the people from the dry dock 1 across the bay over to the other side of the base where they would go to chapel, or they'd go on Liberty, or they'd go on the exchange or whatever. But his main function was to take people to the chapel service because the ship was going through a lot of maintenance, and they thought it'd be better to just have chapel on the other side of the base. And we'll look at this interview later, but I'm pretty sure what happened was the attack started, which of course was right around 8 o'clock. He immediately got in the whale boat and headed back to the ship. Now, my sister's version of this, that she always thought that that whale boat had somehow been attacked and that he ended up in the water. But we now know that that's not true, based upon a newspaper article that we saw. He got back to the ship, and his duty station on the ship was a 5-inch gun mount. And I actually have the after action report of the USS Pennsylvania, which details almost every minute of the attack. And there's a part in the report that talks about a 5-inch mount being bombed nearby, and that a lot of shrapnel spread out from this explosion. Now, being in the Navy for 32 years, I can only assume what I think happened. There's no actual evidence unless I could get a hold of my father's medical records, which maybe I can, I don't know. Anyways, my gathering based upon what happened is that a lot of shrapnel got into his body, and he lost a lot of blood. And like you stated, there wasn't a lot of medical people. A lot of people were just going around and collecting bodies. Yeah. And I believe, based upon what is about to happen and that we have evidence of, is that probably people, not even corpsmen, but just people, were going by checking pulses, and if they didn't feel a pulse, they thought they were dead. So they took him away that day, assuming that he had died. And so, because information, I just watched a special, communication between the Hawaiian Islands and the mainland was very touch and go back then. And I don't know how this happened, but the story I was told was that my grandmother was under the assumption that either somehow the word had got to her that my father had died, but that's not true. And so what happened was that she received this telegram, and this was dated December 11th, 1941. So for the first few days after the attack, my grandmother thought that she had lost her son during the attack. And as it says, Mrs. Winifred Curry, that's where she lived, the Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your son, Albert R. Curry, Seaman First Class, U.S. Navy, has been wounded in action in the performance of his duty and the service of his country. The department appreciates your great anxiety and will furnish you further information promptly when received. To prevent possible aid to our enemies, please do not divulge the name of his ship or station. So this was on December 11th. So as of December 11th, that's when, and she might have found out sooner, but as of December 7th, she got the official word that her son had not died, that he had been wounded. Now, with that information in hand, the local newspaper was able to publish a picture of some of the local guys. This was in the local newspaper. This was from December 16th, 1941. And when I first read this, I thought casualty meant death, but in reality, casualty meant wounded or death. It meant a lot of things. Anyways, a couple of these pictures, many of these pictures did die, but the third picture, this is a picture of my father here. There is a little bit of an article below that talks about that he had been wounded in action. So as of December 16th, the local newspaper in Rockford had published that he had been wounded in action. But to what extent, we don't know. Now, then we come across the article that I published the other day, which was this thing that said, Seaman Albert Curry completely recovered from a head wound suffered in the Jap attack on Pearl Harbor, left the Naval Hospital at Honolulu on December 8th, according to a letter received here by his mother, Mrs. Martin Curry. He is the nephew of Officer John Curry of the Rockford Police Department. Now, I agree with you about this date. Now, this is based upon a letter, secondhand information, because from what I found out, what I will tell you here shortly, was that he spent a few days there. That might be where 4 days comes from that you heard. from John. I don't think that he left the hospital the day after he got that head wound. I think he was in the hospital for a couple of days.
I think he was probably in the hospital a lot longer than that back then.
Yes. And also, I'm about to tell you a story that you probably have never heard, which is going to be crazy, because he was not in the Navy hospital on December 8th. So that also is conflicting. So that part there. So we know that he had been wounded, and that now I'll go forward here a little bit, and then I'll go back to the story about what happened December 8th, December 9th. Now, I don't know why it took so long. This is dated, and you'll see it. This is dated the 7th of November, 1945. So 4 years after the attack, it says, in the name of the President of the United States and by direction of the Secretary of Navy and the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet, the Purple Heart is awarded by Commander Battleship Squadron 1 to Albert Curry for wounds received in action against an enemy of the United States on 7 December 1941 at Pearl Harbor. It took 4 years to get this medal. Isn't that crazy?
I think it took a lot of people the whole war to get their medals in some sense.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they're still giving medals to Korean veterans too.
Yeah. And so he did receive the Purple Heart, and I still have his medal to this day. Many of you have seen it on Facebook. This is this medal, and this is the box that I still have the box of the medal. The medal's actually being mounted right now, but I still have that. And here's the box that it came with, the Purple Heart. Yeah. I just think it's crazy that it took so long to get that medal. So now let me tell you the strange story about all this. So growing up, I heard a story, and I don't remember who told me, but that when they took his body from the ship, they didn't take him to the hospital. They thought he was dead. They actually took him to a temporary morgue.
That's right. Now that you say that, that was John's story too.
You getting it now?
Yeah.
Yeah. They actually took him to a morgue. And on the morning of December 8th, he woke up, where he became conscious. And he was laying, I want to say, if I recall, it was a gym, or it was a temporary. I don't think it was like a real morgue. I think it was a temporary morgue.
I think it was a gymnasium.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's kind of what I heard too, is that it was a gymnasium, and that he woke up in this morgue, and that he had lost a lot of blood. And there's also a story where his first thought was that he kind of knew where he was at and was afraid that he was going to be buried alive. Now that seems kind of sketchy. There's no evidence or proof of that. It's just a story that I heard somewhere down. I think my sister told me. I don't even know if that's true or not. It's just that's a story that I heard. Yeah. So yeah, he woke up in the morgue, and that's why. And then obviously he's wounded, so they took him to the hospital. That's why I think that thing of him going back to the ship on the 8th is untrue. I think that he went, but what happened was that he left the morgue and went to the hospital, and somebody thought that he left the morgue and maybe went back to the ship, because back then you had to do a TAD thing. Every time you transfer, people had to do things, and people are trying to get news as quickly as possible. So now I always heard that story, but I was always kind of like, yeah, come on, Dad, is that really true? Did you really, it just seemed really kind of far-fetched to me. Well, about 2 years ago, I've done lots of genealogy. I started doing some research, and I got a hold of a newspaper article from the Rockford Morning Star, which was from a reunion in, I want to say, like 1962. Can you see it, Caroline, the newspaper?
Yeah, I can see it. Uh-huh.
So it says here, they had a reunion. It says, Grim Pearl Harbor details recalled by 30 vets here. So they had a reunion in Rockford. Let's see. So it would have been, 1961, I guess. But anyways, I read down this, and then it says down here, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
It says here, Albert E. Curry, 903 North Central Avenue, was aboard the USS Pennsylvania. Here's a quote. I was in a motor launch when the Japanese, hit. He said, I got back aboard at about 10 o'clock a.m. when a bomb hit. I woke up in a morgue. That's right. They had laid me out in a morgue.
Yeah.
Curry, O'Brien from Rochelle, and Wilson from Lincoln, Nebraska were all in the Pincy crew. So this article was the first thing that confirmed the story that I had kind of heard about throughout my life, but I never really had it confirmed. So here's a story about him being in a whaleboat. He got back to the ship. The ship was bombed. He got hit, and the next day he woke up in the morgue. So that's a story that is true. Now, the most craziest thing, though, Caroline, which I'm about to show you, was that so he woke up in the morgue on December 8th, 1941, correct?
Yes.
So do you see what I have in front of you now? This is his death certificate.
Oh,
Look at the date of death.
oh my goodness. Look at that.
He died in the morning of December 8th, 41 years after 1941.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy? That's
Yeah.
when he died. He had a heart attack.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
What did he die of?
he had a heart attack.
Oh, okay. That was very popular then.
Yeah, and he was a heavy smoker.
Yeah.
That was the lifestyle he had. But what's so funny is that you and I have been kind of texting back and forth today, and it just dawned on me because my sister and I have had lots of discussions about my father and the war, and about how when people go things like that, they don't really talk about it. And back then, they didn't understand PTSD and stuff. And I found out after he passed away that he'd gone to the doctor and stuff. And I never thought about this until today when you and I were texting this morning trying to plan this thing. I wonder if remembering Pearl Harbor and watching the news and that all flooding back to him mentally, if I didn't have something that might have triggered a heart attack. I have no idea, but
Good possibility.
it's a possibility because it's just so weird that he would have died the morning after the anniversary of it's 41 years from 1941. So I'm just wondering if that was a tough night for him, remembering all that stuff and recollecting and visualizing everything that had happened to him. And he was in poor health at that time. He was 60 years old, which is still really young for someone to die, but he was still in pretty, not the best health. He had high blood pressure, etc. But I'm just wondering if that had anything to do with it. And I'm going to talk to my sister about that. But that's
a really good possibility, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. So basically, the recollection that you have is correct. And can you tell me, like, how long you've known this story? Is this something that he told you right away, or is this something that you've heard later in your marriage?
No, I probably heard it fairly early on and very often. We talked about Rockford and the Currys a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
My kids don't know anything about my family. They only know the Curry stories. So that's why I'm writing them down now. I'm writing mine too.
Yeah, no, it's a great deal. And this story is a wonderful story. In fact, I don't have it with me here, but my nephew Declan, at some point when he was, I don't know how old he was old enough to do like a report. And my sister contacted me and said, hey, Declan's getting ready to do a historical report. And I guess people could choose which one they wanted to do. I could be wrong, but I believe two of the kids, Declan and another kid, both chose Pearl Harbor. And the teacher, and I could have the story wrong, but I think what happened was the teacher said, well, one of you can't, they both can't do it. And someone's going to have to like pick something else. And then Declan said, well, my grandfather was there. And so you win. And I sent him the Purple Heart, and he had done a whole report about the whole Japanese attack. I have a lot of mementos. I have some menus. I have some old USS Pennsylvania newsletters and stuff. And it was the Pennsylvania's, it finished up being a test ship for the atomic bomb explosion at Bikini Beach. They were testing the atomic bomb at Bikini Beach after the war. They put a whole bunch of ships around this island to see how it would affect. And it didn't sink the ship. They had to go back and what do you call it? Not scavenge it or whatever. They had, and they sunk it on purpose. And so it's off the Bikini Atoll somewhere on the Pacific, someplace at the bottom of the ocean, someplace. But yeah, that was a story that I grew up, and it wasn't until I found that article about the whole morgue thing.
Well, just recently, I read something about what happened to all those ships. Where did I see that?
Well, I think they found, I think they've done some exploring. They may have found in Nevada.
Well, they raised some and repaired them. About half of them were raised and repaired. And
Yes.
some were put in service and some,
Oh, after the war?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
During the war.
Yeah. No. So
That's when
obviously, the Arizona sunk, right?
Right.
It was gone.
Yeah.
The Utah sunk.
Yeah.
That was gone. So the Utah and the Arizona were sunk.
But they raised some of those that sunk.
But all the rest of them, all the rest of the ships, except for one other one, all were fixed. That was one of the big mistakes. The Japanese were supposed to, in wave 3, they were going to destroy the dry docks. But because they didn't destroy the dry docks, they were able to take the ships that were damaged right over to the other side of the bay, put them in dry dock, fix them, and then they went back into service. The California, the Nevada, the West Virginia, the Maryland, they all went back into service. So Pennsylvania all went back in service. The one ship that capsized, the Oklahoma, they had to, if you are really interested in history, you can go take a look at the pictures, but it was completely turned over. So they got all these wires, they brought it back upright, and then they tried to fix it, but the damage was too big. So they said, okay, we're going to have to take this back to San Francisco or someplace and fix it there. And so they towed it. But on the way to San Francisco, it sprung a leak and ended up sinking somewhere between Hawaii and California. So the Oklahoma was also lost. But all the, some of the good stories, but all the other battleships where they fixed and were back into service. And I think a lot of them were, at the surrendering of Japan in the Bay of Tokyo Bay. And of course, my memory of my father was, he retired from the Navy after 20 years, and he never talked about Pearl Harbor. He never talked about the war experience. That's why I'm not even sure the memory that I had came from him. It might have came from somebody else. I don't recall. Maybe he might have said things, but he didn't get into detail. That's for sure. Like I never heard a story about the explosion or him being found, other than him being in the morgue the next day. That was the main story I heard.
No, you were quite young though when he died.
I was 24, I believe. I was 24 years old at that time. But I do remember the year that right before he passed away, he was getting these magazines about retired Navy men. And I visited him one day. I remember we watched the 1982 World Series together. And he was showing me this article about the battleships. All the battleships were being bought back. The Iowa, the New Jersey, the Wisconsin, and the Missouri. And he said, hey, you should think about doing this. And I go, I don't really want to go back to the Navy. And then, of course, that December he passed away. And I remember he had convinced me to do it. Like, well, I'm not going to get selected. So I think before he passed away, I said, okay, I'll do this. I'll put my paperwork in, but I won't get picked. And not only got picked, I got picked on the first group. And I remember getting the paperwork saying you've been approved, and they said you have until this date to decline or accept these orders. And at that time, I was getting ready to graduate, and I didn't have a job. Of course, both my parents now were gone. My sister was in Florida, and I thought, well, I really don't have any direction right now. And where I was staying at was connected to the college, so I had to move out, and I didn't really have a lot of money. So I thought, you know what? It's only 2 years. So I went back to Mississippi. Was on the Iowa for 2 years. And that set myself up for success after I got out. But one sad thing would have been awesome for my dad to be there at the commissioning. But Uncle Paul was there, and I believe you met Uncle Paul. He was at one of the later Curry, like 2005 Curry reunions.
Uncle
Paul Dacklin, he was on my mother's side. He was my mother's brother.
Oh, okay.
But he came to, I think he came that last reunion. I can't remember, the 2003 or something like that. I don't remember if John was at, I'm pretty sure you and John were at that one. Yeah, because it was at the Holiday Inn.
Go to.
Huh?
I said the boys went to a reunion that we did not
go to. Yeah, but that's true.
2003.
Oh, that's what it was.
2005. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. Well, listen. Yeah. So that's the story, Caroline. That's pretty much all I know. I think it's fascinating. But I think it's fascinating that you kind of threw me off guard because I didn't know. So I would really wish. I want to know how John found out. What if my dad told him that they were?
Well, let's see. John was back and forth to Rockford over the years. He
Mhm.
didn't get married till he was 33 the first time.
Yeah.
So he during his 20s, he worked in Rockford for a while, and then he went to Florida, but he would go back into Rockford for a while
Yeah.
and had seemed to
I
have quite a few friends
I
there.
do remember talking to him at one of the reunions, and he said he used to play. Did he play bridge?
Yes, yes,
I think he said he played bridge a lot with my Uncle Martin, who Uncle
really.
Martin was a big bridge player.
And his
And
folks were too, yeah.
yeah, and I wanted to bet you, and I'm guessing that. Do you know what year John was born?
1923.
Oh, then my dad and John knew each other because my dad was born in 22.
Yeah, they grew up together.
Yeah, they
And
grew up
Leo was
together.
born in 22.
Yeah, yeah,
Leo was born in February, John was born in September.
yeah.
But John and I met playing bridge.
Mm,
We got on an airplane together as strangers, and it was a cargo plane. And the very first time I went up to Shreveport to see if I wanted to join that unit.
mhm.
And as soon as we took off, everybody got up out of their seats and sat in circles on the floor, Indian style,
Yeah.
and started playing bridge. And I'm looking around and I thought, I want to play bridge. Well, John and one other guy were sitting there playing gin rummy. So I went over and asked them if they needed a fourth for bridge.
Mm.
And they found somebody else and we played bridge. And that's how I met him.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I
We
just
played bridge.
remember him telling me stories. We were having dinner at the Holiday Inn, I think. And I remember that little side room there, and I was sitting next to John and just going, guys, so much more.
He was full of stories.
Yeah, man. And then I remember him telling me about bridge and playing Uncle Martin. I didn't know Uncle Martin very well. He worked for years and years and years with the Barnum Bailey Ringling Brothers Circus. And the only time I would see Uncle Martin was when they would come into town, and he would get a hold of my dad and he'd get us some free tickets. We'd go down there and visit him. He was kind of I think he had a bad experience in the war too, because he became kind of isolated in his later years. But I do know that when Declan graduated from high school, I went to Miami for his graduation. I think that's about the time that we drove up to Sarasota, which is where Ringling Brothers, they all kind of got started. They have a school there. Yeah, and they have a cemetery there with a lot of the circus people there, and he's buried there. And we visited his grave. Oh, really? The only people that have ever seen his grave, to be honest, because he never had any kids or anything like that. So, but anyways, well, listen,
that one of your other uncles also a policeman?
John William Curry. Yeah, right? My grandfather's brother, John William Curry, which was the Newton's father. Catherine Newton's father was John William Curry, and he was a policeman. Yes. And that's why in that article, you saw that it said, is the nephew of John William Curry a policeman? And John William and my grandfather were in the hospital at the same time for different things. And that's when my grandfather, I believe, died in 39 or 40, I believe. I'm not really sure. But that's kind of what kick-started my dad's idea about going into the Navy. And I don't think he actually graduated from high school, which was the same school that I believe Don went to. He went to a private Catholic school, right?
For 11 years. And then he went to the West High.
Okay.
West Side High School or whatever, West High.
Yeah, and I think that's where Catherine Newton went. My dad went. And Mark went. They all went to that Catholic private school there. So, I think he dropped out and joined the Navy, and he was in the Navy in late 39, 40, I believe, because it was right there. And because they didn't have any money, and so I think Dad decided that he was going to go in the military, and then that way he could send money home, because my grandmother didn't work, and of course Martin was a policeman and made good money.
Yeah.
So
no women worked at that time.
yeah. Well, listen, I guess that wraps us up there. I'm glad that we had a chance to talk. And you were pretty much right on the money there. And that's why I was a little surprised, because you're the first person that I know outside of my sister and I that knew this story. And I think that's fascinating that John knew it and that he told you that story. So it was pretty much dead on, just a couple of facts. But you didn't know about him waking up in the morgue the next day, did you?
When you said that, I knew that I had heard that before.
Oh, you did? Okay, good. Yeah. But you didn't know that he died the same day, though.
Oh, when I saw the 8th, I thought that can't be.
Yeah, that's well. Listen, I'm going to stop the recording now,
Okay.
but we'll be able to share this with the family.